Thank you, Alex, for being with us. Okay, so I guess I'll forgive you, Mom. I used to guys up and say, oh, my teacher. Look, if this is all you do first we're going to study, is very good.
I don't know her well, and I'm trying to get one of the very old friends.
I've been in the office and my big problem is keeping the numbers.
Hi, I'm Robert Ellen I've been tasked to redo things on No, and I didn't know the again part, so I don't know. She sounded very frazzled and was very upset that she wasn't quite late. But oh, this is fine. There's much more important stuff going on there. Much more important.
You get your
Oh, well, I'm not done with questions. I just take the value of a number of planets of the age. One of whom was here from Jerusalem, so he was in Jerusalem, and the whole of the you get on it. No, I'm serious. So, you know, your mother is not about himself, and so I did not get that, and so that much on Monday I'm running for conference times. So I'm doing that, and then I'm contemplating that. So
And the dogs are actually oh my God! We can run like this.
But he does not know what he can write.
Oh my.
I'm so happy you're here. I'm so sorry to keep you waiting.
No, it's okay. You didn't keep me waiting at all. Here's what I'll call
Let me put this down and I will be right back. Do you need it?
No, I don't think so. Okay, and then we can go to somewhere smaller.
You could. No, I think it's a nice room. I mean, it is 1970s kind of. I'll make lots of noise.
You'll make lots of noise.
Did she come with you?
I should have brought
It's very funny. I'm reading the book of Carol Burnett, and she said they always said you should plant someone. No, that's funny. It's very funny. No plant. I'll be right back. So I haven't been planted for you, okay?
Okay, all right. So I know that the question will not necessarily be a friendly one.
No. Have you? Are you a fan of Carol Burnett by any chance?
You know, I really am, because that kind of slapstick really takes such a great deal of ability.
But you remember the quick. Yeah, exactly. And she played second to Desi on, basically.
Yeah,
she was the star. Do you remember the skit on that was a takeoff from Gone with the Wind?
Oh yes, that's brilliant.
There's
the curtains.
There's a and you know, there's I find I haven't been laughing a lot recently, but I heard her interview, and that's exactly what I did. I was sitting in the car laughing like crazy. I have a picture if you want me to look for it. It was so funny, brilliant.
And her sister's in that too. There's
a girl who looks like her sister,
but
but
is
not her sister.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought she was
No, I'm reading about that when the cute young girl who.
I was her sister.
This one. They hired her because she looked so much like her sister, but they're not sisters. Isn't that amazing? Yeah, it was quite fabulous. But this one,
This is a biography or an autobiography?
She's written. It's about her 11 years of the show, and she sat down and she had to watch 274 shows or something, and some of them she was gasping for breath because they were so funny, and others she said they weren't bad. But this one was the curtain. Originally, the exit was not.
We're going to give it a few minutes because apparently parking is a mess and construction is a mess, so we're going to give it a little time. Can I give you some coffee or some tea or some water?
No, just water is terrific. Yeah.
Actually, I'm having goody laughs with this book. It's well worth the board.
Okay, all right. Well, you get it from the Westmount Library?
I presume. I'm not from Westmount, but it's in our library in Cote Luke.
Cote Luke is everything.
It does.
It's true. It's a very good library.
It is.
I mean, Westmount's a very good library, but Cote Luke's pretty incredible. Oh, I love these chairs here. I've never seen them here.
I saw them. They've taken them from here.
Yeah, they were the ones that were dancing. Oh, great.
Really.
I love these chairs here.
I know, right? You'd think they were made for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Was this your idea, Josh? The chairs?
No, the chairs were my idea.
Oh, brilliant.
But the execution was Josh. Which is very, funny if we can keep it like that. We just have some water.
I feel like this is very professional now.
I know, right?
You know, when I talk shows, Letterman, that was gone. So there's an opening.
See, there's an opening. You're trying to get rid of me. That's really nice, doesn't it? Yes.
Isn't that funny that we never thought of it?
Thank you.
perfect way.
And also, when I grew up, we had chairs just like this in the ground corridor that I
I was actually in the Brooks building yesterday. I was in your neighborhood.
I was hoping that maybe I would be there on Friday, but then I realized you're Friday. Well, not likely.
What's Friday?
Well, Friday was, remember the Archbishop from
Oh, yes.
Jerusalem.
Yeah.
It was all right. It's okay. I would have liked to have had more people. But he seemed to be very happy. At least there was a little bit of a cross section, so we had some people who were Muslim and some people who were Jewish.
Being shocked the first time I heard that.
So I was there for the advisory board.
I was with yesterday. The first time we were there.
really
and the birth rate and death rate.
So this might be the messaging that you want. Sure. Oh, is it what do they want to do?
5 people in the last 2 years. It's
It's a nice
time when you
Just needs a little shifting for day 2. It's so funny, we had a few dozen more people signed up before not here. We'll give it a minute more and then we'll start. Alright, so guys, we're going to give it a minute more and then we'll get started. I'm a big believer in, on the one hand, accommodating the crazy traffic woes and parking woes of Montreal, but on the other hand, not penalizing those who made it here on time. So we'll start on just another.
So we didn't do like a linguistic?
No, we didn't at all. Very different from anything else I heard. And it was with statistics. He had the wife in Florida, and he talked and he lectured, but it was not any. And you could see the audience didn't really believe that this could be true. More people are educated, more people are than ever before. And of course, he implied that it means that we have to have a completely different attitude towards it and keep it going this way. And one of the things is, that we, he said one thing. He said,
I did all that kitchen type things.
there's very little chance
Maybe they would want problems. I don't know if they take off for one basis. And the same thing with the energy food take off. That's what we're doing with our
that seems to be one thing that all organizations don't want to have.
Volunteers.
And that nobody would want to make it happen if you have to police God.
Will you join me? Which side do you prefer? Whatever you like. It's not a bad chair to end the day. I mean, I know
it's a very cozy chair.
Yeah.
It's a nice chair.
I feel like this is a fireside chat without a fireside chat. An arc-side chat.
This place. There.
Exactly. Brilliant. There you go. Absolutely brilliant. So, friends, I have the absolute honor and pleasure of introducing you to one of my favorite people in the world of religion and really beyond. Did I actually take a class with you at McGill?
I don't think so. I think we met for the first time when we were at Convocation.
Wow. We have a picture.
You have a picture?
I have a picture from around 20 years ago.
Oh, 30.
Not 30.
20?
25.
Okay.
Of Professor Kirkpatrick handing me my, was it my diploma? Yeah. I think it was. Anyway, she looks exactly the same.
That's really common.
I like to think I have a better haircut. But I am absolutely thrilled to have her here today. She is a professor of Hebrew Bible at McGill. She is an Anglican priest, and she is at the cathedral, at the, the Anglican...
Up the hill at St. John's.
Up the hill.
Was it St. James the Apostle?
She was at St. James the Apostle. I'm behind on my saints. And is now up the hill and a neighbor at St. Matthias. And what I was hoping for from tonight, the idea of this whole series is to explore unexpected religious people and paths, because I think, especially in Quebec, which is so secular, we get this stereotype of secularism on the one hand and the stereotype of religion on the other hand. And the religion that most of us Quebecers and Quebecois think about is the religion that was rejected during the Quiet Revolution, the Catholicism that once held sway over this entire society. And of course, there are all kinds of us out here who are religious, who are clergy, but who are not within that stereotype or that characterization. So the idea behind tonight is for this to be a conversation. More Professor Kirkpatrick than me. My primary mode with you is academic, but also the Reverend Dr. Professor Kirkpatrick and me. And I thought we would start it out by a little bit of a bio and an opening question or two, and I'll hand the floor over, and then we'll have some back and forth, and then we'll open it up to everybody else who is here. Good? Good. Fantastic. All right. So, Professor Patricia G. Kirkpatrick has her DPhil from the University of Oxford, which is an excellent place. I can vouch for it strongly. Dover's was back in 1984. She got her Master of Theology before that at the University of London. Before that, she spent 2 years studying at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, which is one of the pieces I hope and trust she'll speak about tonight. Her BA in Religious Studies was from McGill, and she was before that at Montreal Diocesan Theological College as well. She has a tremendous range of publications. Her list of languages is kind of fabulous, so I'm going to share it with you. Biblical Hebrew, Biblical Aramaic, Targumic Aramaic. I bet you didn't know there were that many kinds of Aramaic. Koine Greek and Ugaritic. I have a special respect for the last. I tried Ugaritic. I didn't make it past the first few flashcards. With reading competence in modern Hebrew, French, and German. I'm not kidding. It's true. And her list of publications, this really is my favorite part, spans everything from a piece on Job's wife to a talk on, hang on, this is expert witnessing on, this was the best title, Patricia, that I have ever seen in my life. You know which I'm coming up with.
I really hang on for it, I did.
She gave an expert opinion in 2016 on the origins of the chocolate Easter bunny in Canada. So the breadth and depth of the scholarship of the priest and professor sitting beside me is truly impressive. And so I want to start us off by saying, did you ever think when you were a kid that this would be who you would be and what you would be doing? Tell us a little about what got you from there to here.
Yeah. Well, I never wanted to be an academic. I really never ever wanted to be an academic. I thought academics were selfish, self-centered, egotistical. What other kinds of synonyms can I think of? They were gauche. They had no abilities to look outwards at the rest of the community. And so I never wanted to be an academic. I wanted just simply to be a nice country minister who would help in small communities and help in the way that I thought was a genuine one of helping people enter into a world that was ethically good. And I think I began to think this way when I was about 16. So I can honestly say, hand on heart, that I wanted to be ordained from about the age of 15. And I knew it.
And were women being ordained at that point in the Anglican?
Well, I didn't know that they weren't, but they weren't. I didn't know this. And I was really very, very fortunate because the family that I grew up in had both my mother and my father were adamant that their 3 daughters would be able to do whatever it was that their 3 daughters wanted to do, and nothing would prevent them. My father, I think, in the back of his mind, thought that really he would prefer all of his daughters to marry and have a family and bring up children, and so to that end he made sure that each one of us had an ability, a skill. Mine was supposed to be a secretary. It didn't work out because I don't know, I didn't quite get the tapping on the typewriter. So I graduated from a secretarial school with 25 words a minute. And it's not very many. It's not very many. So that went out the window. So, but anyways, in terms of ordination, not that I told anyone. I didn't say this to anybody, and now I will witness to the fact that it was all as a consequence to a middle-aged Westmount housewife who one day, or not one day, but was having meetings of youngsters in the church, the United Church, on just opposite the park. But it used to be a United Church.
Oh, Westmount Park? United? Yeah. The one with the gardens outside.
Yeah.
By the dog run.
Yeah. And I was 15 and an atheist. I had been confirmed in the Anglican Church, but I had been confirmed with my fingers crossed behind my back, so literally. So that when the bishop came to confirm me, so that when the bishop came to confirm me, I didn't believe anything. But I was informed by my mother that under no certain circumstances was I going to get out of this. The invitations had been sent. I had gone to confirmation class. That was it. So here I was at 15, and I was a staunch atheist, verging on staunch Marxist, as only a 15-year-old can be. Okay. It's only a 15-year-old. And one of my best friend, Jane Skelton, I went to the study, and my best friend, Jane Skelton, said, I really want to see what you, or how you react. And so will you come to church this evening? Because there are these sessions for teenagers. And I said, yeah, sure, fine. And so I went, and they were looking at the story. The passage was that of the Good Samaritan. And it was in a room that was about 1/3 the size.
Do you want to maybe share the story in case some folks aren't familiar?
The room?
No, the Good Samaritan.
Of the Good Samaritan? Yes, okay, fine. So the story is that going down to Jerusalem, this fellow happens to be set upon by thieves. And everything is taken from him. And as everything is taken from him, he is left to die by the side of the road. And people pass by him, not wanting to have anything to do with him. And all of a sudden, the person who stops to see whether or not the person who has been attacked and needs help is a Samaritan and says, do you need help? Anyways, the long and short of it in terms of the New Testament is that here was the least likely person to stop. Of all of the religious individuals who could have stopped, who perhaps because of their own value systems should have stopped, they didn't. But this Samaritan, the outsider, the one who had the most liminal existence, did. And so it really is about talking about marginalizing or marginalized people, but as people who themselves have actually understood the values of the kingdom of God. Now this is all taking place in the Jewish community, right? It's the turn of the century with Jesus. Jesus is a good Jew. And so this is reversing, however, social norms of the day. And as I sat listening to this, I watched as she, and just a very simple-minded, not simple-minded, a simple, middle-class, middle-aged housewife who gave of her time every Thursday, like tonight, Thursday night, to a group of teenagers. And she lived in that little house. I don't know whether any of you know us, not very well, but if you come down Victoria Avenue just before Côte Saint-Antoine, there's a little house above right next to the larger house, a little doll's house. She lived there. And anyway. So I came back. I kept on coming back. I came back for a second time, and a third time, and a fourth time. And all of a sudden I realized that something was happening, just simply because of how it was that she was beginning to talk about outsiders and insiders, and what it was that our responsibility was to the community, and the community's responsibility, etc. And I then began to look at the gospel, and decided that in actual fact I probably had missed out on something, and took it a little bit more seriously. I didn't go to church. I didn't start going to church. But that was the seed. Now, some people will probably say the seed was the confirmation classes, or perhaps actually Christians will say it was baptism that did it. It was right back when I was a baby up at St. Matthias. But, and if it was, well, that's fair enough, fine, that's okay. But my memory, what I remember, is that it was that moment that something rang true to me that I hadn't been reading somewhere else.
And then at some point, did you bump up against that question of ordination? How did that play out in terms of your timeline and the timeline of the Anglican Church?
Well, I didn't say anything to anybody because, this was just, I don't know what my parents' expectations were exactly, but it was certainly never articulated by my mother that this was a vocational option that she admired.
To be fair, I'm not sure how many parents of rabbis wish that for their children.
Yeah, okay. So I went off to Neuchâtel Junior College, and there, again, I met somebody, and I'm just going to call her the wise woman in my life. And it was just by happenstance that she ended up teaching at Neuchâtel. And so there she was, and I immediately, how there's some people that you just gravitate towards? I don't know what it is or why it is that you do, but you just gravitate. You just want to be with them. And you feel safe, and you want to talk about, again, values, and she did. And what I didn't realize then was that she was, in fact, ordained. She was an American, and she was from California, and she was ordained in the something church. So when I left Neuchâtel, just before I left, I can remember so vividly, we were standing looking over the lake at Neuchâtel, and she said, "So, Patsy, what do you want to be?" And I said, I want to be ordained. And she said, "Wonderful. That's exactly what you should be." In only the way that a wise woman can, does in your life. And so that stayed with me, so that when I went back home, and I then took up at McGill, I entered into the honors program in English, and then went over to religious studies to see if I could see what I could take there. And there were a couple of courses that I could take, so I began in religious studies. And then after the first year, I informed my parents that I wanted to be ordained, at which point my mother shrieked and said, "No, please, no! You'll never be married, and I'll never have children." I'll never have children. I said to the mother, "I'll have children, you'll have..." But there was that to negotiate, because my father was a little bit baffled, but he was willing to support whatever. But it was my mother's reaction that then I had to negotiate. Because of course I would never want to offend my mother. but this was not something of her choosing, that she would want to see, and it remained so. So and then I went. I remember my father sitting in the pews and saying, "All right, look, Patsy, this is a great idea, but you've got to do something about this. You can't just all of a sudden say, I want to be ordained, you can be ordained." We're Anglicans, and so the Anglican Church has a certain process. I'm not quite sure what it is. Let's go and ask the minister. The minister was the minister at St. Matthias, and then Jack Deutsch, and so Father said to Jack, "Listen, as we're coming out of the church, my daughter thinks she wants to be ordained." Jack goes, "Really? Why don't you teach Sunday school? I need somebody to teach Sunday school. In the meantime, come here, or go down here," and this was a meeting down here at the church. There was a church down here at the corner. And little did I know it was a meeting of something called the Committee for the Defense of the Faith. Sounds good, right? I mean, everybody is like to defend your faith. So, and they were going to discuss the ordination of women. And so I trundled on down here and went to the meeting and was just horrified with what I heard, because unbeknownst to me, this was the committee that was set up in order to oppose the ordination. And there was this room that was just filled to the rafter with people who were filled with such anger, just such anger, and stories about women who wanted to be ordained, and how unnatural it was, they must themselves be unnatural, etc., etc., etc. And so I left the meeting, and I just cried on those stairs. I remember crying. And I don't cry easily. And I sat down and I cried because I couldn't believe the vituperous comments of them. Anyway, so that just made my resolve a little bit stronger, I think. And then I went and wanted to know how it was that they could have these opinions. And then the rest is history. They say that, one of the problems of cognitive dissonance is that either you overcome the dissonance by finding out that you were wrong and then deciding, all right, I must submit to and agree that I was wrong, or you prove everybody else wrong. Mm-hmm. And I was fortunate enough to be at that moment in time when we had the strength to prove everyone else wrong. Because I certainly was not doing it. There were women before me who were doing it. And so I've always been very grateful for that.
So what was that? I'm curious now about two directions, and feel free to follow either. The first is what that experience was like of being, if not the first, among the first, or that first generation or two of women entering the Anglican priesthood. But the other question is to maybe take us through a little bit how you ended up so we've got from secretarial school to wanting to be ordained. How do you get from wanting to be ordained as an Anglican priest to studying Hebrew Bible and Holocaust theology in Jerusalem?
Right. So, of course, the Bishop of Montreal, by this point now, was having to listen very carefully to the parishioners who wanted to have the ordination of women go ahead. And when I presented myself, he accepted my candidature. There's a process, which I don't think is dissimilar to the process that rabbis are vetted by.
Oh no, we aren't vetted nearly as much as you are.
Okay, well, so in order to supposedly make sure that we don't have psychopaths or sociopaths.
Oh no, we get that.
Oh, you get that. Good.
Anyone was concerned.
Good. So we have a process, and we go through something called ACCO. It's an acronym for the Anglican Church on orders and postulants. Because in the Anglican Church, ordination is considered to be a sacrament. So I went through that process, and it was determined, yes, they would support me in this calling, but I was too young, which is true. I was too young. I was 20 years old, coming up to finish my BA, and ordination cannot happen before you're 23.
I have to intervene for half a second. So the Jewish equivalent, I don't know if it was the same Rabbi Greenspan when you were applying to rabbinical school, but I have a distinct memory of being sent as this part of the process to a therapist's office on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and you go down the stairs and you sit on the couch and you fill out some questionnaire with a series of fairly bizarre questions. You have a short conversation about your childhood and they send you on your way.
Oh, there was a Rorschach. I didn't take a Rorschach test.
Oh, I think I had a Rorschach test too. That's true, but I think it's kind of funny that you have this process of, discernment and sacrament, and we, got sent to a therapist for an hour. Yeah, anyway.
Well, ACRO is a weekend. So, and not that weekend, you're a priest, a layperson, and a psychiatrist. And so the whole thing, you can't do that. Anyway. So, and everybody, of course, was hunting around for homosexuals. Because that was the other thing. The church was about to crumble because there were these women and there were these homosexuals.
Never mind women who were homosexuals. No, that was a bit, yeah. Sorry, the same thing that you were going through?
Yeah, but they were one of the things they were looking for. Yeah. Really? Alright, so I was too young, so that was another kind of sort of category, and then they decided I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, so I had to go out away somewhere, and learn about the world. So I was so angry because I had it all set up in my mind. I was going to do an STM at McGill, and then I would be of the right age, and I could then continue with ordination. Now all of a sudden they wanted me to go out in the world. So what I did was to apply for a scholarship being offered by the Theological College to go into Jerusalem to study, and I was going to become Jewish. I mustn't have anything to do with this. And so I went.
But you had the right vocabulary.
So I went, and there was the scholarship defrayed some of the costs of the graduate studies.
But I feel like we need a little more unpacking here. Mm-hmm. Other than the kind of beautiful irony of taking a scholarship from a theological college to go to Israel and with the intent of becoming Jewish. I kind of appreciate that. But, I mean, the joking question is, well, why Jewish? The more serious question is, presumably your Christianity had something to do with Jesus, and Judaism's God, as you know, a somewhat different take on that. So what was going on there?
Because I had a wonderful professor of Hebrew Bible and introducer. Period, end of statement. I mean, it's just absolutely fabulous. Somebody called Donna Runnels, who later became a dean of the Faculty of Religious Studies.
I remember.
And she was just super, and at a very, I think in my first year, in point of fact, she was going off in sabbatical and agreed to take me. I told a lie. Actually, it was on my way.
You know we don't do confession, right?
It was public. And I traveled with her throughout all of Egypt and Jordan and Israel, and ended up then in Ulpan that summer. And then would go back the second summer for Ulpan.
So for those who don't know, is Hebrew immersion in Israel.
Sorry, yeah. And I think it was then, I was just bitten, I fell in love. Those of you who've been to Jerusalem know what a beautiful city it is anyways. Then it was just after the war, and so everything was a little bit discombobulated.
Which war?
So this was 1975.
So after the 73 war.
Yeah. But everything was still a little discombobulated. People weren't completely set in their ways. There was still the generation of individuals who knew Arabic and who knew Hebrew, and so there were still individuals that were, things hadn't stratified. It was before the first Intifada, and so the fears were not the same. I was introduced to the Nashashibi family that became my foster family there. And every Friday I would go for a wonderful meal down in the old city. So anyways, so that, I think, is basically what did it for me. And also because I found the New Testament exceedingly boring in comparison to what the Old Testament was all about. The Old Testament, of course, from the time that I studied it, was not a Christian hermeneutic. So we called it Old Testament studies. Now most individuals in universities would call it Hebrew study of Hebrew Bible. But for me, the New Testament was really quite boring. It was short, anyways. It was a very compact number of writings, and the Hebrew Bible had just that many more possibilities to it. So I went away, but I didn't think that anything was going to come of this. It was only once I was studying at the Hebrew U that I then began to study with various scholars, one of whom suggested I start doing an MA. I began looking into that, thinking seriously about that. It was the case in those days that you had to write your MA in Hebrew, and so most individuals were going to take 5 years. And I figured that would be probably how long it would take me. Now, most individuals get their MA after 2 years. So 5 years, but that's kind of willing. And then, I met again another woman who said, "What are you doing here? This is crazy. You're interested in Aramaic, you're interested in Syriac. Why don't you come and study with the one man in all of the world who can help you in this?" And that one man was somebody called Robert Murray, a Jesuit, who was teaching at the University of London, and who in point of fact was teaching Aramaic to the Reformed students.
Oh, from Leo-Beck College in London.
That's right.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah, it was really, anyway, so I thought, well, okay, I'll try, I'll see what happens. And I had exactly, $150 to my name, and the ticket to London was going to cost me $95. So I thought, well, I'll just eat a lot of rice and tomatoes if it doesn't work out. And I did it, and the interview went well, and I was accepted. And so I upped stakes in Israel, which was something very hard for me to do, but I knew that I was going to try this. And anyways, the 2 years happened. I wrote a thesis. I met some wonderful people while I was studying there. Raphael Lowy at the London University College helped me, in fact, sculpt the thesis. Robert Murray said, "You know what, Patricia, I think you better go and see my friend Raphael and see what he has to say." So I remember going in, and he was in a very huge Nissan hut. He's dead now, but it was a huge Nissan hut. And in the forecourt of the university, and I knocked on the door, and he opened it up and said, "Come in." And there wasn't any kind of smile at all. It was just, "Come in." And the whole room is surrounded with, do you all remember what card indexes used to look like? Card indexes from his dad, who had the anthology of rabbinic sayings, etc. So here we were in the Nissan. He had had a terrible wound from the war. He was in Tunisia, I guess. And so his legs was out like this. And the legs stayed out like this, and it was covered about half the room. I was on one side, and he looked at me and said, "So you want to do something on anti-Christian polemic in Jewish writing?" And I said, "Yes. There's a Bible there, pick it out." So, of course, the text. So I picked up the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, and he said, "Let's read from a little bit from Isaiah." So I picked it up, and I had to read from Isaiah and then translate from Isaiah. So the test was there. It was, okay, all right.
apparently, by the way, here I'll interject too, I hear stories from people who were bar and bat mitzvah in the age of Rabbi Stern, who was the rabbi here for decades, and I'm told that he would stop a bar and bat mitzvah student in the middle of the service and make them, is this right, Sheila, spontaneously translate from their portion. They wouldn't chant at that point, they would just read, but they knew that at any given moment they might have to stop and translate because what was important to him was to know that people understood. Yeah. What's that?
To prove that they really studied.
Yeah. I don't know, Rabbi James said whether we should try and reinstitute that. I don't know that we would be popular, but it is a test. Sorry, keep going. Yeah.
So he said that, you know what I would do, if I were your supervisor, I would suggest to you that you write something on, choose one of the Jewish holidays. So I did, and that which I chose was Passover, and the rest is history. So it was Passover from 100 BCE up to 200 CE. There were so few people at that point who were interested in Aramaic, so few people interested in Targum. Nobody was interested in Targum.
Do you want to explain what Targum is for?
Targum is the Aramaic translation, but also interpretation of the Hebrew narrative. And in places, it expounds on the narrative, so it's not a straightforward translation.
One of the great, so there's, Targum gets written down, but it has, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's Genesis and the oral tradition going back to times in synagogues where somebody would read the Torah in Hebrew and it would be translated by the Meturgaman, by the translator, into Aramaic because that was the language that people understood. So it would be as if someone was standing beside the Torah reader in one of our services translating into English, which is a wonderful corrective to the notion that we are the first generation of Jews to not fully understand Hebrew, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's absolutely. So anyway, so this all happened, and because of the academic year in London, it finishes in September. The examinations are in September, and I therefore had to decide before that whether or not I was going to go anywhere. And my supervisor said, you should go on and study with Sebastian Brock in Oxford, so go up and see whether or not
You know that I studied with Sebastian Brock in Oxford.
No, I didn't.
30 years later. Well, 20 years later. The sweetest, I don't know if he was then, but I know the sweetest man who would bike everywhere through the city. Absolutely brilliant and totally unassuming was my recollection of him, and an absolute expert in his field. Yeah.
So I went up and I was interviewed by somebody called Nicholson, and he said, "Well, so what do you want? I see here that you want to do something on Messianism in Talmud." I said, "Yes," and then I began to amplify. And he said, "Well, I'm sorry, but I can't accept you, and I can't recommend you because the process is the interview happens after you've put forward whatever it is you want to do, and then the person who's interviewed you will then go before the faculty board and say, yes, this is a bona fide 3-day project, and I will supervise, or I know exactly who should be supervising." And so I said, "No, you haven't got enough rabbinics behind you. At any moment during the viva, which is the oral defense, somebody might throw you a googly. You're not prepared enough. So what else do you have on your plate? What other ideas?" And I looked at it, because at that point I said, "Oh, thank God it's finished now. It's finished. So I can go home and say, I really tried. I tried my best. I really did." And then he says, what else have you on your plate? So I fumbled around in my mind about something that I had been thinking about. And he said, "Well, that sounds good. The faculty is not meeting until the day after tomorrow. So bring up your proposal tomorrow." I I went home on the train, and I still was thinking, okay, this is it. Feeling obviously let down. I mean, who the hell likes to be told no? You can't do it. This is it. It stops here. And I got off the train, and the person who met me said, well, why don't you just go and see your supervisor? So I did. I went back to Murray, and all he said was, pompous ass. Pompous ass. He opened up his front drawer, handed me this huge key, from I don't know where, hands me the key and says, that's the key to the library. I'm going to pull it up, Nick, and tell them that you're going to the library. You'll probably just have to spend the whole night there. It's okay, because there's coffee in the senior common room that you can have. And then I'll be awake around about 7 o'clock, so bring me the prepared draft of what it is that your proposal will be, and you can go back up to Oxford by 1 o'clock.
Is anyone else feeling like Hermione is going on?
So it's a little bit goofy, right? I mean, it was huge, and the Jesuit library is just absolutely magnificent. It's huge, just beautiful, beautiful. So I did it, and I handed it to him and said, yes, this is fine, except that the person that you want to really look at, you've spelled his name incorrectly. Got on the train, went up, and Nicholson said, yes, fine, I'll accept this, and I'll put this before the faculty. What I didn't know then was Nicholson had just arrived at Oxford from Dublin. And for those of you who don't know about academics, it's not always the case that your graduate students come with you. And your graduate students lend to you a certain kind of kudos. So Nicholson now had a graduate student. But I'm very glad that he saved my butt, because I think that I probably would have ended up in a great deal of hot water, not having the kind of background that I should have.
So, after all that, how did you end up coming back home and this combination of congregational and academic?
Well, I meant it when I said that I didn't want to be an academic. And so when all these things began to roll out I had to just make sure that I didn't lose the whole issue of ordination. And so there were other places that interviewed me. I had decided, however, I wanted to come back to Montreal. And McGill, there was a line that opened up. And when I was being interviewed at McGill, I made it quite clear that I wanted to make it clear that I was coming in as an Anglican priest. My concerns were going to be with the professional year program, the professional program. Yes, of course, I would continue to do research, but this would not be necessarily the only track that interested me. That there were other tracks, given our interest in training people for ordination. And so long as that was clear, then I was willing to stay. I'm not quite sure that anybody really understood what I was talking about. And at that time, we were 3 people who were women who were ordained in the Anglican Church in this diocese. One of whom ended up then having a nervous breakdown. So we never paid attention to the fact that there were women who were falling by the wayside. It was something that I certainly didn't pay as much attention as I could. To this day, I wear the stole of that woman, just to remind me of any number of things, but mostly of just how harsh the institution could be towards them.
So let me ask you more about that. I'm somewhat cynical about the whole notion that with this latest scandal with Harvey Weinstein, that all of a sudden things are going to change. It feels to me a little bit like when there's uproar over the latest tragedy with gun deaths in the U.S. and everyone says, this time things are going to change, and, a week later it's business as usual. But I know that one of the things that has become important to you over the years is addressing sexism in the church, and I have to imagine kind of paying more attention than maybe you did at that time to women who were falling by the wayside. So could you say something about that?
Well, and I think also in academia, because my concern for the Women's Studies program at McGill was such that I wanted to make it clear that there was an interest, yes, in the academic study, but that the notions and issues and ethical issues surrounding feminism as a movement were important as well to look at and to address. And so the only way that in the academy you can get any mileage is by actually legitimating a program. And the program of women's studies then became for me a focus, and an important focus. And yet, I can remember walking down the street and one of my colleagues saying, when are you going to finally be finished with this nonsense? It's just a fad. Feminism is a fad. And you're junior enough, or at least I was junior enough, that I couldn't just go. You can only do that when you get home. But that falling to the wayside, I saw constantly with colleagues in the university. Now, it is the case that there are fewer and fewer and fewer women now who are staying within the university context. It may be the case that the undergraduate numbers are growing in terms of women, and the student population is, but in terms of university professors, there are fewer women now than there were 20 years ago.
Why do you think?
Well, once you take away all the pragmatics, well, of course women are not staying because they want to be married, they want to have babies, and they want to have children, they want to bring up a family. Once you put that aside as a cocktail type of answer, I think that it is very much the case that the kinds of constant bickering that goes on and internalizing of or a refusal by those around to allow a different kind of governance to take place is predominantly what it is that turns women off. And so you want to achieve a consensus. But if you are in a situation which is constantly asking you to be combative, it's tiring. It's just simply tiring. I think it was The Economist just the other day that came out with an interesting article. It was just a small little article talking about I think it was coming out of Brussels. And it was an experiment. They gave the same number of female lecturers and male lecturers, the same curriculum, the same textbooks, the same numbers of men and women in the classroom, in the lecture hall. And then they asked for reviews, assessments of them. And even though everything was equal, everything was the same, the women actually, in terms of how they were assessed 20 or 30% lower than what the males were being assessed on. Now the question was why? Why is this? What's happening? What is happening? What's the dynamic in the lecture hall, in the economics classroom, that doesn't allow an equivalence to happen between the male and the female lecturer? I've never had difficulties in convincing people that I'm wonderful. No, but in holding people's attention, or in the lecture hall, and having a certain kind of authority. But I do remember pretending that I needed glasses when I was first lecturing, because the people that I was lecturing to were almost 20 years older than I was, and so I pretended that I needed these glasses. Put them on, take them off, put them on. And there, a bit of that. So for some reason this didn't affect me, but it is affecting women, I had it up on my Facebook the other day. I'd love for somebody to begin to correlate that statistic with the statistic of the number of women who are taking short-term disability leave. And why is it that women seem to be taking more short-term disability leave than our men? What is it? What's the dynamic happening in the university? And I haven't got an answer for that.
You know, I'd be curious about, and I want to open it up to everybody else's questions because I've been, enjoying this and should share it, but the correlation between what happens in academia, of course, and what happens in congregations and on the pulpit in terms of style of leadership and what people look for and so on and so forth. You joke about the glasses. Again, Rabbi Greenspan, I don't know if it was the same for you, but we sometimes joke that in the last year of rabbinical school, a bunch of our male colleagues would start growing beards, right? Because that was the year people got engaged or married, and the year that the men would cut off their ponytails and start growing their beards. There would just be kind of a transfer of hair from the back of the head to the chin. And I'm sure some of it was, because when you're ordained and you're 20-something and everybody says you look like their grandkids, that you want to have some authority that was accessible or available to the men in a way that it was not to the women. And but it was always really interesting to notice that phenomenon. Did that happen with you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yes. Yeah. Women have the good fortune of looking young for longer, but it was years until people stopped saying, "Oh, you're so young. You're young to be a rabbi."
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure you get that all the time too.
For a little longer yet. I'm not sure how much. So let me ask you one more question before we open it up to everybody, because I know one of the other things that you've worked on is anti-Semitism in the church, and I think that for many of us, especially those who grow up Jewish and in a fairly insular Jewish community, as I did in Toronto and as I know many do in Montreal, for me the New Testament was taboo. I never picked one up until I was studying it in graduate school. And my association with Christianity through the Jewish history I had learned was very much the story of pogroms and 2 crusades and Holocaust and persecution and all of those things. And I think in contemporary times, one of the ways that the church kind of comes or different churches come onto the radar of the Jewish community is around issues of Israel and the BDS movement and which church is making which proclamation and all kinds of feelings mixed up in that. So I'm wondering if you could speak about that piece for a little bit from your vantage point as somebody who has spent time living in Israel, clearly has friendships and relationships throughout the Jewish community and has had some of these conversations from within. Is that a easy enough question?
Yeah, sure. Again, I think that I was very fortunate because my parents had any number of Jewish friends, and as a consequence, in my household, at least, I was never able to make any kinds of distinctions, except that some held this particular holiday and others that particular holiday. So, in that sense, there were never any disrespectful comments or thoughts. It just was not. It was for anything. So the New Testament. Yes, of course, the New Testament is filled with all kinds of slurs about the Jews, and if you read it as typifying people now, then you have every right in the world to suggest that this is not something that you want for bedtime reading, or any kind of reading. When Rosemary Ruther writes Faith and Fratricide in 77, a book that if you haven't read is a fascinating book, because here's somebody who is whose expertise is in the early church fathers, and what she does is to look at anti-Semitism in the church from an historical point of view, and looking at it from Scripture. And well, of course, it's going to continue if you've got this notion of what the Jews are. But that doesn't mean somehow or another that, and especially in the light of the Shoah, that you just fold up the tent and say, well, fine, we won't discuss the New Testament with my Jewish friends. So in the church, I never have faced it directly. I've always used educational means with which to alert individuals when they were about to fall into traps of supersessionism.
Do you want to explain what
supersessionism, which implies, not implies, but simply states that yes, the covenant, the old covenant, under Jeremiah is no longer, the new covenant is now under Jesus. So you have Old Testament, New Testament, one supersedes the other. It's easy to fall into a supersessionism if you read but the New Testament. So my strategy has been one of the educational process and dialogue, and so for me, it was the dialogical that was so important. I remember when Elie Wiesel came and we sat down, and he said, Patricia, he has a wonderful book. I don't know whether you've read it. All of his books are wonderful, but he has a wonderful book that he writes in dialogue with a Christian priest, and it's on the Book of Job. So the two of them are in dialogue, and he said there are some issues that can't be broached except through the dialogical, because it tempts the other person not to be honest with what they're feeling about what it is that you're saying or what they're seeing. And I think that I've experienced that in enough times, in enough different situations, to recognize that dialogue is always the better way of proceeding than informing somebody of what it is that they're allowed to think or not think. If that makes any sense. The anti-Semitism in the church can be so subtle that people in the church are not even aware that they're doing it. They're completely blind. They just don't recognize what it is that they're doing. And so, again, I was fortunate enough to be brought up in that generation where my teachers were hell-bent on trying to come up with language that would talk about the First Testament and the Second Testament, or the Newer Testament and the Older Testament. In some way, to highlight for those in the church, you're looking at something the wrong way. If what it is that you're looking to do is to liberate, what you're doing, in fact, is enshrining generations of enslavement for anything else, to notions of who's got the truth and who hasn't got the truth. So I think that, along with the 60s and that opening up of talking and allowing individuals to know that their neighbor is not something that should be shunned because they aren't a Christian, but of another religious tradition, that was also important. So it wasn't just simply anti-Semitism, it was also how do you profile yourself in the light of the other so that the other no longer, or even you, becomes a traitor to inclusivity. Yeah.
Why don't we take that as a moment to open it up, if others have questions or thoughts? Alice.
Do you ever find that you've encountered contradictions in wearing two different hats, as an academic and as a spiritual leader? Like some conflicting imperatives, or?
Yeah, never. Never. Now, that doesn't mean that the institutions that hire me don't see them as conflicting. So a very long time ago, I wrote a short little essay about how it was that the academy, the university, hates. I mean, the university does not go to bed with the church, or with any. It just simply doesn't. These are two realms, and it wants to keep those realms separate. And I don't know whether it's because it has, for such a long time been together, and they don't trust one another. So it is the case that the church does not trust intellectuals, and intellectuals in the university are not trusted if they actually speak about their faith. So I'm not bothered by it as much as the institutions are, I think, and my students. Because some, especially those who are coming from religious backgrounds, whether they be Jewish or Christian, will look and say, well, are you going to now give me a particular line of thinking that is faith-based as opposed to intellectual-based? First of all, I don't see that you can make those kinds of distinctions so easily. When a professor stands up in front of a class or a lecture hall, the professor professes. They profess, and they want the students to have as much joy and enthusiasm about the subject as they have. I think it's more of a problem sometimes because, especially at McGill, which is my alma mater, and I love it, and it has given me all the freedoms that I could ever possibly have hoped for or imagined. But I think sometimes that the bent that is scientific allows individuals to think that in ways that are bipolar. They divide us in ways that are unnecessary to divide. And although science is all about quantitative ways of thinking, listening to Stephen Hawking's talk about faith is a very interesting thing.
Just to sort of follow up on that, I'm wondering about the relationship between teacher and student and the relationship between spiritual leader and congregant. Is there a contrast there for you, or are they similar to each other?
Yeah, I evaluate one and the other one I don't.
And the other one evaluates you.
For a very long time, I refused to take students on as a spiritual guide. Sometimes students come and say, will you help me through my whatever problem? And so I refused to do that precisely because I then would be in a situation of conflict. Because obviously you don't want somebody who you're helping in a spiritual sense to be slapped with an F. So there are times in which I have to say no. I can't. It's not the right time. It's not the right moment. And if I'm teaching you, then that's not the right moment. In the congregation, though, it's kind of different, isn't it? Because there's so much thirst out there that people just sort of soak it all in, whatever it is that you have to give as in terms of teaching. And it's not, you're not evaluating them there to them at that point. So it's easier in the congregational context. What's not so easy, of course, is that the congregation themselves, sometimes you can think that you're not interested because you're too much of an intellectual. So how could you possibly be interested in me? Or, how could you possibly want to help me through this particular situation that I'm in? So that's the difficulty more than anything else. Is that what you were getting at?
Yeah. No, it's actually really interesting the way there's kind of a gut reaction to see them as opposites, to think that if you've got the head, you can't possibly have the heart, or vice versa.
Yeah. Well, it's rather what I did when I was 16 years old and said I never want to be an academic. They're all a bunch of self-righteous, pompous, egotistically minded people, and so I don't want to have anything to do with that. Yeah.
AJ, and then Sheila.
I'm curious, I'm drawn back to the 15 and 16-year-old self. It was a different time, obviously. There was a lot of different stuff going on in the world when you were that age. Yeah. And yet something called to you. There are those individuals, those wise women and that Westbound housewife. I'm the mom of teenagers right now, and I'm seeing how different the world is. But given your experience and given your long view, how is your approach to the 15, 16-year-olds changed, if at all? And what kind of wisdom have you earned or can you share about fostering those flickers of sparks of divinity in young people now?
I don't think it has changed, essentially. I really don't. I really don't. When I was asked by the Bishop of Montreal, when I was first ordained to be Bishop's youth chaplain for the diocese, it meant that I had to go roaring around to various places and discuss with quote-unquote youth. Somebody called David Oliver looked at me and said, okay, Patsy, the first thing you have to do is to get yourself down to the record store and buy the music that they're all listening to. And the music that they were all listening to was Jackson. Michael, thank you. Michael Jackson had just come out with an LP, Bad. Man in the Mirror. Now, that was already in 1984, 85. So I guess things have changed again since 1975, 76. But I didn't find so. I mean, I still found young people desperate to want to be heard and just to talk to. And to talk, not talk at, but talk with and by and for. And so I bought that LP. I bought the LP. And we went out and we did crazy things. I mean, we made tapes of, every year the Anglican Church gets together here in this diocese, and there's a synod. And everybody gets to chew the fat and tell the bishop what they don't like or do like or whatever. But there's also a youth component to this, and we decided to make a video. So we made a video, and we put it to the music of Michael Jackson. And I'll never forget the bishop spending the whole 20 minutes with his hand in his head, because the bishop sits on the podium like this, and he just the whole face is listening to. But I don't think young people's needs today are any different than what they were in my day. And it was to have somebody actually give the time to listen to them. People say, well, they got their telephones and they get it onto them with Facebook and they do this. Facebook is fun, that's fine. But actually to be able to sit down and say, Mom, or whoever, what's happening? I mean, why am I feeling this way? Why am I not able to figure out that I'm actually a good person? So I don't think that they have changed very much. I think that what has changed is that I used to have so many hours free. I could read a book. I could take a walk. I could make a friend. I could have a conversation with a squirrel or something. I could. My imagination. Now it seems that kids really have every single solitary one of their minutes monitored by some adult or another as they do things, as opposed to just sit and wonder about life. But anyway, that's a... But I think that just generally speaking, youngsters need and they need an intergenerational setup. I said this the other day to somebody, as our churches here in Montreal or in Quebec begin to shrink and begin to close, the one of the places that acted as intergenerational meeting grounds is now closed. And so that intergenerational meeting ground, and so what's substituting for it? And I don't see the substitutions.
So that's a perfect segue to you, Sheila, whether or not you'll speak about that, because you've been such a leader in getting us thinking about those intergenerational pieces. So please.
I've enjoyed this evening so much. I can only say thank you, Pat, because you brought back so many thoughts for me, and watching you and thinking I really knew your peer group when you were growing up. And my children were part of it in many ways. I think we're living in a very complicated time. Every time is different, and everybody always thinks it's the hardest where they are. But I do think that the pace of change is so rapid, has been so rapid in the last 15, 20 years by the ways of communicating. And it's fascinating to me that they communicate this way all the time. And to the person sitting next to them. And
That's right.
that makes you wonder what it was. But what I was also thinking, I was thinking about being Jewish in Montreal and coming here from New York City and from a women's college in the United States. My family was always open. My mother was very, very open, and she went to the Sanger, with Margaret Sanger in the beginning of planning parenthood and all the rest of it. But it's not so different than my kids and the way they grew up, I think, is the kind of thing. But there's always been the thing about how you manage to understand to grow to know who you are and your heritage, and be open to the next person's heritage and how they grew up. And I think that's really a challenge today when it's so necessary. And that's and I don't think we found much of an answer in it. I don't think that that all the electronics is helping us find those kinds of things.
Well, it's interesting because my sister went with her husband, Alf Margulies, to Europe just 2 weeks ago to do some of the Eastern European countries. So they were in Warsaw, and because they were in Warsaw, they were to Auschwitz. And so I said, okay, I want half an hour now from you, Xenia, who's a psychiatrist. I want you to sit down and I want you to talk to me. I want to know what you felt. I don't want to know here. I want to know what you were feeling. And so she tried, and she said, I kept on thinking to myself, how do we stop this from looking like Disneyland? Auschwitz, which is this huge, as you probably know, layout, so you have these tour groups going by. She said, the most awful thing for me was these tour groups, where they over here with them and over there. And how do you stop this kind of trivializing the horror? And I said, well, ensuring then the real issue is how do you tell and remind somebody of the banality of evil, of just how easily it is that we slip into the realms of evil. And so what you're saying about teaching the other person, the person sitting next to them is a human being who has the same fears, the same anxieties, the same hopes, the same lusts as you do, is what's so important. And the comment about Auschwitz was just simply that we're not doing that. We're yes, of course, saying to people, it happened here. It did happen. It must never happen again. It did happen. But that's not good enough, because even if one doesn't want to talk about what is happening in the world, using those kinds of analogies, nevertheless, it is the case that we're not quite clear on just how easy it is to join in the evil. And I remember when I was in South Africa, and Mandela had just come out of prison, and so we were there as the churches to witness to the election. And in the meantime, the two individuals who I had learned about, one of whom had been in charge of external security, the other one internal security. One had been responsible for making one of the ministers, Methodist ministers that we met, blind, legless, and no hands. And they had purposely made sure that he would pick up a letter that was a bomb and blew up in his hands. They were sitting now in the parliament, and they were going to be candidates in the election, because now everything was new. There was this new era was coming in. I had refused to have anything to do with them, and so I wasn't going to go with the group to go and listen. And everybody said, "Oh, come on, Patricia, we're doing this as a group. You're letting the group down. You're not down here. You're letting it down." I said, "I'm sorry, but this is a wall for me, and I'm not going to do this." Anyways, I went, sat in the back, as far away from everybody. And it turned out that as we were leaving where we were all meeting, these two men walked me down the hallway on either side. And as we were walking down, they were showing me this stained glass window and this statue, and showing me their wives who were down at the end, and they were going to be giving me juice. And they couldn't wait until they were going to get orange juice, or they were going to. And I just kept on thinking to myself, my God, these two human beings used to murder people. And it's then that the penny dropped for me about the banality of evil. That just when you think there can be nothing more horrific, it's actually that seemingly insignificant person next to you who is allowing somebody to come into office and now represent your nation. So I don't, getting back to what you were saying though, Sheila, it may be that this world is moving very quickly, but we haven't been very good at underlining the issue of evil, or saying, what's humanity about? What's the most human about things?
So let me ask one last question, if I may. A funny one. All right, now I have to come up with a different one. All right. All right, what is the best joke you've ever told from the pulpit or the classroom?
Oh gosh, I have never told any jokes.
Really?
Yeah, no, I really haven't. I know, I'm just a boring person. No.
All right, so I'm going to have to go back to my serious question.
Okay.
All right, I tried.
A reason to wrap up.
So, in the face of evil, light question. I had someone come speak to me this week who was really struggling with a lot of the just horrific things that are in the news and having a hard time getting up in the morning and taking care of her kids and with those aspects of life being foremost in her mind. And I think one of the things that people turn to us for as religious leaders is a sense of hope or faith or whatever one might want to call it. And I'm wondering for you, what, if you can articulate it, is that what makes you hopeful?
I think it really comes back to something that we were saying earlier on, and that is that for me, the hope will always come out of the kinds of relationships that you form in dialogue, in the dialogue. And I keep on coming back to this because people aren't very good at dialoguing any longer. They think that simply because I don't agree with you, that somehow or another I don't like you. Or that, because I have a different take on something, it's an indication that I'm on another side. It's like, you listen to Fox News, I don't listen to Fox News. So I'm not going to have anything to do with you, I know I have the truth. Everybody has the truth, but nobody's listening to anybody else. And for me, the hopefulness then therefore comes out of individuals who are not in a position to do anything else but dialogue. And these are the individuals who have the least in the world. I keep on thinking about my work in Auberge Madeleine with the women who help the women who are homeless. And the hope that they are able to instill in the women who come to them for help is a hope that they do because they can connect with somebody else and help. And so for me it's all in the dialogical. It has nothing to do with institutions, except that institutions themselves have to be built in order to be able to house those of us who have the time and can enter into that dialogue. Those institutions are important, but I think that if you take away the humanity of people, the fastest way to take away the humanity is not to have that fun.
So let me close with two thoughts and a thank you, if I may. So the thoughts are as follows. The first is just more dissemination than anything else. Some of you may know that there's been another recent kerfluffle with McGill and the Student Society and an executive of the Student Society or someone who was, removed because of his views on Israel. And so a lot of that has been circulating for those who are on social media for the past 24 hours or so. And I did get my hands on the message sent by the principal of McGill to the McGill community about this, and if that's of interest to you, it's on my Facebook page and the Montreal Board of Rabbis Facebook page. I just posted it because I think that and mention it now because I think it relates to that question of how do we create spaces where you can have conversations with people with whom you disagree, which I think for the Academy is vital, and for progressive religious institutions is really vital. So that's the first. The second is a snippet of a conversation I had today with one of our congregants who actually works to get hearing aids, quality hearing aids to people, especially in emerging economies and developing nations who may not have access. And they paired with this research group to find out what actually is the effect of distributing these hearing aids, and they found that of the people who were evaluated as being depressed before they received the hearing aids, 83% after they had them no longer reported those symptoms of depression. And so I was thinking about that in terms of what you're saying about dialogue and being in relationship and in conversation and not being isolated. And that to me is a very powerful takeaway. So the thank you is simply a thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming at the end of what I know is a long day to share in this conversation that we have with one another through our institutions, through our friendship, through our communities. And so from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you who came out for the first in this series, and I think this I learned so much from listening to you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Really comfortable chairs. To be honest, there was this connection between the two of you, but it shouldn't surprise you.
Yeah, long.
Did you go to the reunion?
Which one?
The study?
Yes, I was given the Julie Elder Award.
Oh, isn't that nice?
So I was, so the class was, there were not a lot of classmates.
I hope there's been meetings like this.
Take a look.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you came. It was a great question for you as someone who's really spent time contemplating the academic and the study. Just doing playwriting.
You know, most people I know are well, in Manitoba, they do the postal.
All right, so the next time, and do you want to be in touch with those future meetings? Is that good? Okay, so then I'm going to make that, I thought it would be really neat for you. It would be really neat for you. Okay, good. Such a pleasure. You know, maybe just shoot Diane Rose an email. She was on there.